Hello, my friend. How are you today? I hope your day has been kind to you so far. If not, I want you to know, just being here, taking a quiet moment for yourself, is already a gentle victory. Today I want to talk about something many of us experience after 55, but few of us ever talk about openly: the weight of overthinking and the noise it brings into our minds, especially at night. In this video, I'll share my story, not as an expert, but as someone who's been there, and how Stoic philosophy, mindfulness, and neuroscience helped me find stillness again. If you've been feeling restless, anxious, or simply tired of your own thoughts, stay with me. This conversation may bring you the peace you've been looking for. And yes, I'll also share a few little things that helped me, including a reading lamp that changed my nighttime routine more than I expected. It's in the description if you're curious. Now, let's begin. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night. I remember because it was the night after I had watered the garden, folded the laundry, and turned off the porch light just like I always do. Nothing dramatic had happened that day. No phone calls with bad news, no aching back more than usual, no fights with anyone I love. And yet, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, my head on the pillow, eyes wide open, the room completely still. But inside my mind, there was no stillness at all. It was like someone had left a television running inside my skull, flipping through every channel I didn't ask for. Old regrets, errands I forgot to run, things I said 30 years ago, what I would do if I got sick next year, why I didn't call my sister back, whether I locked the back door or not, even though I knew I did. Have you ever had a night like that? One where your body is tired but your mind refuses to let go? It felt like my thoughts weren't thoughts anymore. They were visitors pounding on the windows of my brain, each one louder than the last, each one trying to convince me that something was wrong, something was unfinished, something was unsafe, that if I didn't think it through right then at 2:43 in the morning, something terrible would happen. I remember turning to look at the clock, 3:17 a.m., and then again, 4:02. I didn't even cry. I just laid there, frozen, my chest tight, my jaw clenched, breathing shallow. I wasn't panicked in the dramatic movie kind of way. It was quieter than that, like a fog that rolled in and took the oxygen with it. It wasn't the first time I'd had trouble sleeping, but this time was different. This time I realized something. It wasn't that I couldn't fall asleep. It was that I didn't feel safe enough to sleep, and that scared me more than the insomnia itself. I want to be honest with you, this didn't come out of nowhere. For months, maybe even years, I had started to notice that my thoughts were no longer occasional visitors. They were constant roommates, loud ones, critical ones that wouldn't leave me alone even when I begged them to. Sometimes I'd be reading a book and suddenly realize I hadn't absorbed a single word because my mind had wandered into a rabbit hole of worries about my health, my children, the news, or even my own breathing. I'd be lying in bed and find myself replaying conversations from 1982. Can you imagine? Something I said at a birthday party when I was still in my 40s, suddenly on trial in my mind 3 decades later. Why do we do that? Why does the mind, especially after 55, become so noisy? I began to ask myself these questions in the quietest hours of the night, and the answers didn't come right away. But the questions themselves began to shift something in me. I started reading about it, about the aging brain, about something called the default mode network, about how our minds, when not focused on a task, tend to wander into rumination. I learned that the older we get, the more our brains default to scanning the past, often not the happy moments, but the unresolved ones. It's not personal. It's not even our fault. It's how the mind, shaped by biology and memory, tries to make sense of time. But knowing that didn't stop the thoughts. What did begin to help was watching them. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed one morning, sunlight barely stretching through the curtain, and saying out loud, "I hear you, but I'm not going with you today." I wasn't talking to anyone in the room. I was talking to my thoughts. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to believe everything I thought. That simple idea that not every thought is true, not every thought is useful, not every thought is me, felt like a crack of light in a very dark hallway. I began to see that overthinking, for me, wasn't about intelligence or caring too much. It was about fear, about control, about trying to predict and prevent every possible discomfort before it could arrive. And in doing so, I had forgotten how to rest. I wonder if you've ever felt the same. Like your thoughts became a full-time job you didn't apply for, but couldn't quit either. Sometimes the thoughts are whispers, sometimes they're alarms, but they all have something in common. They pretend to be urgent. They pretend to be helpful. But when you really stop and look, most of them are just noise. There's a moment I remember clearly, one I'll never forget. It was 4:21 a.m. I had not slept a minute. I was exhausted. And suddenly, in the silence of my bedroom, I said something to myself I hadn't said in a long time. I miss peace. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. And in that honesty, something softened. I got out of bed. I sat by the window. I didn't try to fight the thoughts anymore. I just let them pass like cars on a distant highway. I watched them come and go. I don't know if I would call it meditation. I didn't sit cross-legged. I didn't chant anything. I just breathed. And for once, I didn't try to fix the thoughts. I didn't try to replace them with better ones. I just let them be. And somewhere in that stillness, I heard something underneath the noise. A whisper so quiet I almost missed it. It said, "You are safe now." That was the beginning, not a cure, not a grand transformation, just a beginning. I went back to bed and finally, somewhere between thought and silence, I fell asleep. Maybe you're listening to this right now with the same tired mind I had. Maybe you've spent too many nights doing battle with thoughts that don't belong to you anymore. Maybe you've been trying to win a war that isn't yours to fight. If that's true, I want you to stay with me, because there is a path back to peace. It's not instant, but it's real, and it begins with remembering that you are not your thoughts. Let's walk that path together. There was a time when I thought overthinking was a strength. You see, in my working years, when the children were young and bills came like clockwork, thinking ahead was how I survived. I'd plan for what could go wrong. I'd replay conversations to see where I might have said something hurtful. I'd anticipate others' reactions before I even opened my mouth. It felt like foresight, like responsibility, like love. But somewhere along the line, I don't know exactly when, that thinking turned on me. It wasn't helping anymore. It was hurting. It crept in quietly. I didn't notice it at first. Maybe you know that feeling. Like something in your mind quietly shifted, but you can't quite name it. At first it was just being tired. Then it was waking up not feeling rested. Then it was forgetting why you walked into the kitchen. Then one day I was sitting at the table with my hands around a warm cup of tea, And I realized I hadn't actually tasted a cup of tea in months, because every time I drank it, I was thinking about something else, not something important, just something. That was when I began to suspect my thoughts were no longer companions. They had become my captors. There's a strange moment when your own mind turns against you. It's not like a sudden betrayal. It's more like a slow erosion, like watching your favorite chair fall apart, thread by thread, until one day it doesn't hold you anymore. I remember sitting outside on the patio one morning. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle. It was the kind of day I used to dream of when I was too busy to enjoy anything. And yet there I was, worrying about a comment someone made at church 3 weeks earlier, replaying it, analyzing it, imagining what they might have meant, what I should have said, what I'll say next time. Why? Why was I doing this? The comment wasn't even unkind. It was barely a sentence, but I had let it take up residence in my head, rent-free. Have you ever done that? Have you ever let a tiny moment, a passing look, a word not said, become a storm inside your brain? I didn't want to live like that anymore. I started paying attention, not to the thoughts themselves, but to how they made me feel. And here's what I noticed. The more I thought about something I couldn't control, the worse I felt. Not a little worse, much worse. My breathing would change. My stomach would tighten. My neck would ache. And then the thoughts would double down. They'd say things like, "You need to figure this out now. You can't let this go unresolved. What if this gets worse? What if they're upset and you didn't realize?" Thoughts pretending to be helpful, but all they did was make me feel smaller, heavier, and more alone. And here's the cruelest part. I started believing that if I didn't think about it, I was being irresponsible, as if peace was negligence, as if rest meant failure. That's when I knew. These weren't just thoughts. They were weapons. I found a journal entry from that season of my life, and I want to read you a line I wrote. "I used to think my thoughts were trying to help me. Now I think they're trying to break me." Reading that now makes my heart ache for who I was then, for how I carried those invisible weights every day. But that line was also a turning point, because once I named what was happening, once I admitted that my thoughts were harming me, not helping, I could begin to change my relationship with them. It didn't happen overnight, but something shifted. I stopped treating my thoughts like prophets, and I started treating them like weather, some days cloudy, some days stormy, but never permanent, never me. One night, I remembered something I'd read a long time ago in a Stoic text, probably from Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. It said roughly, "It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." I'd heard that quote before, but that night it finally meant something. Because suddenly I understood. It wasn't the comment from church that hurt me. It was my interpretation of it. It wasn't the fact that I was aging that scared me. It was my belief that aging meant irrelevance. It wasn't even the idea of being alone. It was the story I told myself. That alone meant unloved. I started to realize my suffering wasn't coming from life itself. It was coming from my interpretation of life. And most of those interpretations, they were created by a frightened, tired mind trying to protect me, but doing so clumsily, even cruelly. That's when I began to draw a line, a quiet one, in the sand of my mind. There were thoughts that helped me, and there were thoughts that hurt me. The helpful ones were usually quiet, kind, honest, grounded in the present, like a good friend sitting beside you in silence. The harmful ones were loud, urgent, full of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. They demanded attention but gave nothing in return. So I started saying something out loud whenever I felt them coming. Just 3 words, not right now. That simple sentence became a tiny shield. Not forever, not go away, just not right now. It gave me space, it gave me breath, and most of all, it gave me permission. Permission to live in this moment, not some imagined one. I don't want to pretend this is easy, or that I've mastered it. Even now, I still catch myself spiraling. I still wake up sometimes with my mind already racing before my feet touch the floor. But now I know how to greet those thoughts differently. I don't let them drive, I let them pass. And more often than not, they do. So if you're listening to this, and you recognize that war inside your own mind, if you've ever felt like your thoughts were hurting you more than helping, I want to tell you something simple. You're not broken, you're just tired, and your mind, like mine, might need a little retraining, not to be silent forever, but to become a better companion. Because after all these years, what I've learned is this: the goal isn't to stop thinking, the goal is to stop letting your thoughts push you around. And you can, you truly can. We'll talk more in the next part about how philosophy, mindfulness, and small physical habits helped me take back my evenings. But for now, just ask yourself, what if the thoughts that are making me suffer aren't even true? You don't have to answer right away. Just let the question stay with you, like a friend. It was around 2:11 a.m. I remember the exact time because I had already turned over the pillow twice and tried all my usual tricks. Warm milk, breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6, even counting backward from 300. Nothing worked. My thoughts were back again, wearing their usual disguises: concern, logic, responsibility. But I knew them too well now. They weren't trying to solve anything. They were just circling, buzzing, feeding on themselves like a looped recording that never ran out of tape. I didn't want to open my phone. The light always made it worse, but I also didn't want to just lie there anymore. So I reached over to my bookshelf. I have a little lamp clipped to the headboard, soft, warm light, adjustable angle, nothing too bright. I bought it on a whim one night while browsing on Amazon, back when I still believed late-night shopping might fix loneliness. Oddly enough, this time, it helped more than I expected. I clicked it on. No glare, just a calm little glow over the pages. I pulled down a small beat-up book I hadn't touched in years, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It had been a gift from someone long gone now. The pages were yellowed, the spine cracked, but something about holding it felt steady, like I was holding the hand of someone older and wiser, someone who had lived through wars and betrayals and loss, and still found something worth saying to the sky. I opened it somewhere in the middle. No bookmark, no plan, just wherever the page wanted to fall. This is what I read. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. I stared at those words. I read them again, and then again. I'd heard that quote before, maybe in a podcast or painted on a mug somewhere, but something about reading it alone, in the middle of the night, with the silence around me and the war inside me, it landed differently. I thought to myself, power over my mind. I didn't feel powerful. I felt exhausted, lost, like a man carried downstream by a river of thoughts he couldn't control. But the words didn't ask me to feel powerful. They asked me to realize that the mind, my mind, could be observed, directed, guided, that I wasn't the river. I was the one standing on the bank, watching it pass. It was the first time in weeks, maybe months, that I felt something loosen in my chest. I kept reading. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. My estimate of it, my interpretation, my thoughts. That word again, thoughts. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. My problems hadn't disappeared. The house was still quiet. The bills were still unpaid. My body still ached in the same places. But I felt not alone, because here was this Roman emperor, a man who ruled the largest empire on earth, and he couldn't sleep either. He had anxiety too. He had to remind himself every single night that the mind is the battlefield, and suddenly mine didn't feel so shameful. Reading that night wasn't like studying. I didn't take notes. I didn't try to remember anything. I just read until I felt calm enough to close the book. And you know what surprised me? It wasn't just the words that soothed me. It was the way I read them, slowly, without judgment, in warm light, without checking a screen, without trying to fix myself. There was something healing in the ritual itself. That's when I started doing something I never thought I would at my age. I began reading a few pages of Stoic philosophy every night, just before bed. No pressure, no goals, just a quiet habit. And that little reading light, it became part of the ritual. I know it sounds silly. It's just a lamp, right? But it created a kind of boundary, a soft little dome of light that told my brain, this is your space to return to stillness. If you've never tried reading by that kind of light, warm, adjustable, focused, I can't recommend it enough, especially if you find yourself restless at night. There's a link in the description if you're curious. I don't usually talk about products, but I do talk about what's helped me, and this helped me feel human again. But more than the light, it was the Stoic idea that stayed with me. You are not what happens to you. You are how you respond. I had spent years responding to everything in my head as if it were an emergency, as if every thought needed an answer, as if every regret needed resolution. And here was this old voice from 2,000 years ago telling me that I had permission to stop, that I had the power to choose what I let shape me. I can't tell you how freeing that was. So night after night, I returned to the words. Not because they fixed me, but because they reminded me I wasn't alone in the fixing. Sometimes the thoughts still came. Sometimes I still spiraled. But I had something new now, a little light, a few ancient pages, and the quiet assurance that I wasn't crazy. I was just human, and being human means the mind wanders. But it also means we can guide it home. Have you ever tried that? Reading something gentle before bed, not for information, but for comfort? Maybe tonight you could. Not to escape your thoughts, but to remind them and yourself that there's something deeper beneath the noise, stillness. And the beautiful thing is, it was there all along. There was a moment, a quiet, ordinary moment, that changed everything for me. I was standing at the sink, rinsing out a mug. Nothing profound, no music playing, no dramatic sunrise, just the slow swirl of water and ceramic. And then, out of nowhere, a memory surfaced, an old one, sharp and sudden. Something I had said to my father years before he passed. Something I regretted. I could feel it all over again. The tension in my shoulders, the tightness in my chest, the shame like a slow burn behind my eyes. It was as vivid as if it had just happened. And then, A second voice came in. Not another thought, something quieter. It said, "You are remembering. That's all. This is just a memory. You are not inside it anymore." I froze. The water ran over my hands. And for the first time I noticed something. There was a part of me watching the thought, not just having it, but witnessing it. And I thought, if I can see the thought, then maybe I'm not the thought. That realization didn't come with fanfare. It didn't heal everything instantly, but it opened a door, a crack of light. I started watching my mind more closely after that, not judging it, just observing it, like sitting on a park bench, watching people walk by. Some thoughts rushed past, some lingered, some made me smile, some made me anxious. But I didn't chase them, I just noticed, and the noticing changed everything. Have you ever done that? Have you ever just watched your thoughts without following them? It's harder than it sounds. The mind wants to pull you in. It waves its arms. It dresses up in urgency and drama. It says, "This matters. This is important. This needs your attention." But you don't have to follow it. You can just watch it pass. And in that watching, something inside you begins to settle. I didn't know it then, but what I was beginning to practice was something called mindfulness. Not the trendy kind, not the app or the challenge or the breathing technique with music in the background. Just the quiet kind, the kind that notices, that says, here is a thought, here is another, and here I am, still here, still breathing, still watching. I remember the first night I tried to do this on purpose. I turned off the TV earlier than usual. No scrolling, no background noise. Just me, a small notebook, and the lamp by my bed. I sat. I closed my eyes. I waited. Within seconds, the thoughts came. Did you lock the front door? You didn't call the doctor back. You're wasting time. This is silly. But instead of following them, I said in my head, that's a thought, not a truth, just a thought. Then I breathed in and out and said again, that's a thought. It can pass. I must have repeated that a dozen times, maybe more. And slowly, not all at once, the thoughts began to lose their grip. They didn't disappear, but they softened, like waves breaking farther and farther from shore. The more I practiced, the more distance I found between myself and the noise in my head. And in that distance, I discovered something I didn't know I was missing. Compassion for myself. For the man who had tried for so long to control every detail of his life with nothing but worry and logic. For the father who missed his chance to say sorry. For the son who was doing the best he could. For the aging mind that just wanted to feel safe. I started talking to myself differently, not in scolding tones, but in gentle ones. Like this. It's okay to feel this. You've carried a lot. You're doing your best. You don't have to figure it all out tonight. I used to think that being strong meant outsmarting my thoughts. Now I think being strong means sitting beside them, without needing them to disappear. Because the truth is, our thoughts aren't enemies. They're just confused messengers. They think they're protecting us. They think they're helping us prepare. But what they often do, especially after 55, is replay, repeat, and remind us of every unfinished sentence in our life story. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can say back is simply, thank you, I see you, but I'm not you. Now when a wave of anxious thoughts rises, I try not to panic. I imagine myself as a lighthouse. The storm can swirl, the sea can crash, but I am the lighthouse. I don't stop the storm. I simply remain. Have you ever tried that image? A steady light, Not fighting the waves, not sinking into them, just standing. It's one of the few things that has helped me sleep again. Not perfectly, but peacefully. And if you're still listening, if you followed me this far, maybe you're beginning to see it too. Your thoughts are not you. They are not your soul. They are not your value. They are not your future. You are something deeper, something steadier, something older than every regret, every fear, every what if. You are the one who watches. And that, my friend, is where peace begins. I used to be afraid of silence. Not the kind of silence you get when the power goes out or when everyone's left the room. I'm talking about the silence that settles in when there's nothing left to distract you from yourself. No conversation to fill the space. No television murmuring in the background. No task to busy the hands. Just the sound of your own breath. The sound of your thoughts arriving one by one. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't like that silence at first. I avoided it. I called it boredom. I called it loneliness. I called it anything but what it really was, an invitation. One afternoon, not long after I'd begun watching my thoughts more carefully, I decided to try something new, or rather something old that I had never given a fair chance. I sat in a chair by the window, the same one I usually used to fold laundry or flip through old magazines. This time I didn't bring anything. No book, no tea, no agenda. Just me. The birds were out that day. A breeze was lifting the curtain slightly. In the distance, a neighbor's wind chime offered a few lazy notes. The house was quiet, not heavy quiet, but gentle quiet. And I just sat. At first, the thoughts came rushing in, like they always do. You should be doing something. This is pointless. You look ridiculous just sitting there. I didn't fight them. I didn't answer them. I just breathed, in, outside, one breath at a time. Have you ever tried that? Not a big dramatic meditation session. Not the cross-legged on a cushion version you see in magazines. Just sitting. Just letting your breath be the only thing you have to do. If you haven't tried it, you might be surprised at what you find. After a few minutes, I noticed something odd. I felt present, not focused on a problem, not chasing a memory, not planning the next hour, just here, just now. It was as if all the furniture in my mind, the worries, the lists, the noise, had quietly stepped aside to make room for something else. Stillness. And in that stillness, I noticed the color of the light on the floor. I noticed the gentle creak of the chair beneath me. I noticed that my heart, for the first time all day, wasn't pounding. It was soft, like a cat settling in your lap without asking. I sat like that for maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. I don't remember checking. But when I got up, I felt different. Not enlightened, not transformed, just okay. Like the ground beneath me had been reset somehow, like the noise had turned into a hum. I hadn't cleared my mind. That's not the goal. What I had done, without knowing it, was make peace with it. Since then, I've come to think of stillness not as the absence of thought, but as the space around thought. It's like being in a vast room and realizing you're not the voices echoing off the walls. You're the walls themselves, the space that allows sound to happen. That realization changed something fundamental for me, because I had spent decades trying to control my mind. What I really needed was to hold it, to make space for it, to treat it like an anxious child, not a misbehaving machine. And that child, it didn't need punishment. It needed presence. Now every morning, before the world gets too loud, before I open my phone or check the weather, I sit for a few minutes, just to remember, to remind myself that stillness is not something I have to earn. It's not a reward for productivity. It's not indulgent or wasteful. It is necessary, essential. And strangely, it's always been there, waiting, beneath the layers of habit and hurry and noise, like a quiet room in the back of the house that I had forgotten existed. And now that I've found it, I return to it. Sometimes only for a few minutes, sometimes longer. But always, always I come back a little more whole. Maybe you've been afraid of that silence too. Maybe, like me, you've filled your days with doing and checking and fixing, not because you love busyness, but because you were trying to outrun something you couldn't name. But let me ask you something, gently. What if the thing you've been running from was actually the doorway to peace? What if the stillness you avoid is the very medicine your spirit needs? You don't have to answer now. Just let the question breathe beside you for a while. The next time you're alone, try sitting with it, not to solve it, just to listen. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean something is missing. Sometimes silence means you finally arrived. One of the hardest things for me to admit, not just to others, but to myself, was this. I didn't used to be like this. I wasn't always the man who overanalyzed every sentence, who second-guessed every decision, who lay awake at night rehearsing conversations that hadn't even happened. In my younger years, my mind felt more like a tool, something I could pick up when I needed it and set down when I didn't. I could work a full day, come home, and somehow let it all go. Watch a movie, eat a meal, sleep like a stone. But somewhere after 50, something shifted. And maybe you felt it too. Maybe you've caught yourself thinking, why am I so in my head all the time now? If you have, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not broken. There are reasons, gentle, human, biological reasons. Let's explore them together. I remember the first time I read about something called the default mode network. It sounded like a piece of computer code at first, but it's actually something every human brain has. A network of regions in the brain that becomes active when we're not focused on an outside task. In other words, when you're not actively doing something, reading, cooking, talking, your mind automatically defaults to wandering. And for some people, that default wandering is light, curious, reflective. But for others, especially those who have experienced stress, loss, regret, or trauma, that wandering becomes rumination. Looped thoughts, endless what-ifs, mental replay of old wounds. Sound familiar? The science shows that as we age, our brains spend more time in this default mode network, especially in retirement or after major life transitions, when there are fewer external demands and more internal space. But that space doesn't always feel peaceful. Sometimes it feels like a trap. Add to that the changes in memory that come with age. Our brains, as they grow older, become better at recalling emotionally charged memories, particularly those that were left unresolved. It's like the mind keeps knocking on the same old doors, trying to finish conversations that were never closed. Not because it enjoys pain, but because it's trying to make sense of it, trying to complete the loop. And yet, there are some loops that simply don't close. The apology never given, the person who never came back, the mistake that can't be undone, the question that no one can answer anymore. So the mind does what it knows best. It keeps thinking, not to heal, but to protect, to stay alert, to scan the past for threats, to imagine the future in hopes of avoiding regret. But instead of feeling safe, we end up feeling stuck. I remember reading a line from a neuroscience article. I had to laugh, it was so accurate. It said, "The aging brain prioritizes meaning over novelty." That explains a lot, doesn't it? We stop chasing new things and start trying to understand the old ones. We revisit our life's turning points, not to relive them, but to reframe them. To ask, was I right? Did I matter? What does it all mean? And while those questions can be beautiful, they can also become heavy, especially when they're fueled by guilt, fear, or comparison, especially at night. You see, there's something else that changes as we age, something harder to talk about: control. In our younger years, we feel like we have more of it. Control over our time, our choices, our bodies, our relationships. But slowly, quietly, those levers begin to shift. A body that once obeyed now aches unpredictably. A calendar that was once full now feels too quiet. People who once needed us now have lives of their own. And in that vacuum, the mind often tries to take over, to think its way back into control, to analyze, replay, anticipate, because thinking feels like doing. But in reality, it's a treadmill. You sweat, you pant, you wear yourself out, but you don't get anywhere. So when people ask me now why they're overthinking more after 55, I offer this: because you're human, because your brain is trying to help you navigate change, because your memory is reaching for meaning, because your soul still has questions, and because silence, real silence, can feel terrifying when you've spent a lifetime outrunning it. But here's the truth I've learned, the one I wish someone had told me sooner. You are not failing at peace. You're just meeting it for the first time, without the noise of youth to cover it up. And that meeting can be awkward, uncomfortable, even painful, but it can also be the beginning of something sacred. You know, sometimes when I'm walking alone in the park, I think of my younger self, the one who thought he had to have it all figured out by now. And I smile, because I don't have it all figured out. But I've started to understand something deeper. Peace isn't the absence of thought, it's the gentle space between them. And that space, it tends to grow when we stop trying to fill it. If your mind feels noisier these days, don't rush to silence it. Just notice it, thank it, and then ask gently, what am I trying to protect? What am I still holding that I no longer need? Let the answers come quietly. You don't need to chase them. They will find you in time, in stillness, in kindness. Like everything that matters, they come softly. There are nights when the past doesn't knock gently, it kicks the door in. I'm not talking about simple memory. I'm talking about the kind of memory that wears grief like a second skin. The kind that waits until the world is quiet, until the dishes are done, the lights are off, the house is still, and then whispers. Remember what you didn't say? Remember what you did? What you should have done differently? And suddenly, I'm not in bed anymore. I'm back there, back in the hospital room, back in the driveway after the argument, back in that cold winter evening when I said something I've regretted ever since. These are the moments that overthinking sharpens like a blade, not because I want to suffer, but because I want a chance to undo what can't be undone. And that's the heartbreak of memory. It's not just that we remember, it's that we remember too late. I still remember the first time I said something truly cruel to someone I loved. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, laced with disappointment, with exhaustion, with pride. They forgave me, but I didn't forgive myself. Not really. I said I did. I tried to. I buried it under good deeds and careful words and years of trying to make up for it. But there it was years later, still haunting me in the dark. And I began to wonder, is it possible to forgive yourself for something you can never make right? If you've ever laid awake at night asking yourself that, I want you to know, I have too. And for the longest time, I thought forgiveness meant forgetting. But that's not true. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not erasure. It's recognition. It's looking at the part of yourself that you wish you could unbecome and choosing to hold it anyway. Not excuse it, not defend it, but hold it and whisper, you were human and you still are. It took me years to say those words to myself without flinching, because there's a strange kind of comfort in self-punishment. It makes us feel responsible, in control, as if suffering long enough will somehow redeem the moment. But it doesn't. It just builds a wall between you and the present, and I was tired of living behind walls. One night, after another long evening of memories that wouldn't let go, I got out of bed and sat by the window. I wrote down everything I had been carrying. Every I'm sorry I never got to say. Every time I was less than who I wanted to be. Every time I stayed silent when I should have spoken, or spoke when I should have stayed silent. And then, with trembling hands, I wrote something else underneath. I did the best I could with the awareness I had at the time. I didn't believe it at first, but I read it anyway, and something softened. Because here's the truth, the older we get, the more we see what we could have done better. And that's the price of wisdom, hindsight without the power to rewind. But it's also the invitation, because with that wisdom comes something just as important, compassion, not just for others, but for the younger version of yourself, the one who was scared, overwhelmed, trying to keep up, trying to be strong, trying to be everything at once. That version of you, they need your forgiveness, not your punishment. I sometimes wonder, if I could go back and sit beside my younger self, what would I say? I think I'd say something like this. You're going to mess up. You're going to hurt people. You're going to get it wrong more times than you'd like. But you're also going to learn and grow and keep showing up. And one day when the nights get long and the thoughts get loud, you'll remember that love is not perfection. It's presence, it's apology, and it's beginning again. If you're holding something in your heart right now, some moment you wish you could undo, I invite you to try this. Don't rush to forgive. Just begin by holding it gently. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Give it form. And then remind yourself, I don't need to earn my own forgiveness. I need to return to it. Healing doesn't happen in one night, but it begins the moment you stop fighting your past and start listening to what it was trying to teach you. And if all it taught you was this, that you never want to hurt someone like that again, then maybe, just maybe, it wasn't wasted. Maybe your pain became your compass, and maybe, just maybe, you can finally rest. After all the thinking, after all the questions and the nights spent pacing through memory and worry, I began to notice something unexpected. The smallest things help the most, not the big breakthroughs, not the books or the theories or the long conversations about healing. No, what helped me begin to feel safe in my own mind again were routines, simple, gentle, quiet routines. I used to think routines were boring, mechanical, mindless, just something people did when they ran out of passion. But I see it differently now. Routine at this stage of life isn't about control. It's about care. It's about saying to your nervous system, you are safe here. You are held. You know what's coming next. And that kind of safety, even if it's just a warm cup of tea at the same hour, or brushing your hair in silence, or sitting in the same chair with the same blanket, that kind of safety creates space for rest, for healing, for peace. So I began building a routine for myself in the evenings. Not strict, not perfect. Just a handful of small things I could do in the same order, around the same time, with the same quiet spirit. It looked like this: a warm drink, chamomile mostly, no caffeine, no sugar, just comfort, dimming the lights, turning off the bright overheads and letting the house glow softly, washing my face slowly, not as a chore, but as an act of tenderness. And then, my favorite part, sitting in bed with a real book under the soft golden light of my reading lamp. That lamp made a bigger difference than I expected. It's small, nothing fancy, but the light it casts is warm, not harsh white or blue, but something closer to candlelight. It doesn't strain the eyes. It wraps the page in a kind of hush. I found it on Amazon during one of those late-night searches for something, anything, to help me sleep better. And honestly, it helped, not just because of the light, but because it became a signal to my body. The day is done. This is your time now. If you've never used a soft reading light at night, I truly recommend it. There's a link to the one I use in the description in case it speaks to you the way it spoke to me. Sometimes peace is just about creating the right conditions for it to arrive. The books I read weren't complicated. Sometimes a page or two from Marcus Aurelius, sometimes poetry, sometimes a memoir from someone who lived a quiet, honest life. What mattered wasn't what I read, it was how I read, slowly, without multitasking, without a phone nearby, just me, the light, the page, and the night. And gradually, the anxious rituals I used to perform, the checking, the scrolling, the mindless worrying, they started to fall away, replaced by rhythm, replaced by care. There's something ancient about routine. Monks know this. Farmers, grandmothers, children. Routine tells the body, you are not floating, you are anchored. And for those of us whose minds like to drift and spiral and obsess, that anchor matters more than we realize. It doesn't solve everything, but it holds us. Now, when I look back on those restless nights, I don't just remember the pain. I remember the flick of the lamp switch, the first sip of warm tea, the cool feel of water on my skin, the softness of the blanket pulled over my knees, the page turned gently under my fingers, and my body remembers too. It begins to slow, to sigh, to settle, because it knows we're home now. So if your nights feel loud and your mind feels unruly, try asking yourself, not what you can fix, but what you can repeat. What small act can become a gentle ritual? What would it look like to care for your own nervous system the way you might care for a child, or a garden, or a pet that trusts you? You don't need an elaborate plan, just one or two things that tell your heart, I am here, and I will be here again tomorrow. That's what routine can do, not confine you, but cradle you. There is a kind of healing that doesn't arrive through effort, but through rhythm, through doing something with love again and again and again, until it stops feeling like a task and starts feeling like a prayer. There's a question I used to avoid asking myself, not because it was hard to answer, but because I wasn't ready for what the answer might reveal. The question was simple: am I lonely or am I just alone? After 55, life has a way of getting quieter. The phone doesn't ring as much. The children, if you have them, are grown, busy, building lives of their own. Work slows down, or disappears altogether. Old friends move away or pass away, and the world outside your window keeps spinning like it always has, while your own world begins to narrow. It's easy in that quiet to feel forgotten, and in that forgetting, the mind looks for noise, any noise, to keep itself company. That's when the thoughts grow louder. That's when old mistakes become midnight companions. That's when solitude turns into isolation. And it happens slowly, without you even noticing. I used to think they were the same thing. Solitude, isolation. Both mean being by yourself, right? But now I see the difference. Isolation is a cage. Solitude is a garden. One traps you, the other frees you. One tells you you're unloved. The other reminds you of your own love. And the difference isn't found in how many people you see each week. It's found in how you relate to your own presence. There was a long stretch of time when I felt cut off, from friends, from purpose, even from myself. I would walk into the kitchen and forget why I was there. I would open the fridge and close it again, not hungry for anything I could name. I'd sit down and turn on the television, not because I wanted to watch, but because the silence scared me. That, I now realize, was isolation, not physical separation, but emotional drifting, a sense that I had become invisible, even to myself. Then something shifted, slowly, quietly, as I began spending more intentional time in stillness. I started to notice things. The way the morning light moves across the floor, the rustle of leaves outside my bedroom window, the texture of water on my hands when I wash the dishes, the warmth of my own voice when I read out loud to no one but me. And most of all, I noticed myself. Not the version of me that had to impress or provide or entertain, just me, breathing, thinking, watching, being. And I realized for the first time in a long while that I didn't feel lonely. I felt accompanied by myself. That's when I learned that solitude isn't the absence of others. It's the presence of yourself. It's the ability to sit in your own company and feel, not emptiness, but fullness. A fullness that doesn't depend on anyone else showing up. Because you showed up, and sometimes that's all the soul is asking for. Now, don't get me wrong. We still need each other. We are wired for connection. No book or breathing exercise can replace the joy of a kind voice, a shared meal, a warm hand in yours. But what I've found is this. The more comfortable I am with my own presence, the more meaningful my presence becomes to others. When I stopped running from solitude, I started bringing more presence into relationships, not to fill a hole, but to share a wholeness. So if you're listening to this now and your days feel too quiet, if the silence in your home feels heavy instead of sacred, if you're wondering whether you've been isolated or just alone, let me ask you gently, when was the last time you truly enjoyed your own company? Not distracted, not numbed, just present. It might feel strange at first, unfamiliar, maybe even sad, but stay there a little longer. Let the discomfort speak. And beneath it, you may hear a softer voice, one that's been waiting, the voice that says, I never left you. I've just been waiting for you to notice me again. That voice, that's not loneliness. That's the beginning of solitude. And in solitude, there is room for everything. Grief, joy, memory, hope, and yes, even peace. There's something about the night sky that invites confession. Not the kind of confession you make to a priest or even a friend, but the kind you whisper to the wind, not expecting an answer. I didn't grow up talking to the sky. I talked to people, to God sometimes, to myself, often. But the sky, That felt too big, too distant, too quiet. And yet, in the past few years, I found myself drawn to it. Not in search of stars necessarily, not for beauty, though the stars are still beautiful, but because the sky listens, and I needed someone to listen. It began on nights when the house felt too small, too full of echoes, the kind of nights when even the silence had weight to it. I'd put on a jacket, step out the door, and start walking, nowhere in particular, just one foot in front of the other, the cool air brushing against my face, the street lights stretching long across the sidewalk. No destination, just movement, and always I'd look up. There's a kind of humility that settles over you when you stand beneath something that has seen every version of humanity, every joy, every heartbreak, every small triumph and unspeakable loss. The sky is where our ancestors looked when they ran out of answers. It's where lovers sent promises, where soldiers prayed, where children made wishes, where the dying released their last thoughts. And now here I was, just another aging man with too many thoughts, not enough answers, looking up like all the others before me, and saying things I hadn't said out loud in years. Some nights I'd speak to my father. I'd tell him things I wished I had said while he was still here. I'd apologize for moments when I was too proud. I'd thank him for showing up the way he knew how, even when it wasn't perfect. Other nights I'd speak to the version of myself that I had long buried. The boy who was afraid to disappoint, the husband who didn't know how to be soft, the father who was too busy to listen, the man who never said, "I need help." And the sky, it never interrupted, it never corrected. It just held everything, like a vast canvas where I could lay down my burdens without being told they were too heavy. Have you ever done that? Gone outside in the quiet of night and let your thoughts pour out, not as complaints, but as offerings? If not, I invite you to try. Not because the sky will give you answers, but because sometimes all a wounded heart needs is a place to speak without being silenced. I remember one particular night, late last autumn. The trees were bare, the air sharp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible. I had just read a line in a book that said, "The dead aren't gone, they just listen differently." That line stayed with me. So I walked and I spoke. I spoke to people I'd lost, to memories I had hidden, to dreams I thought I had let go of but hadn't. And when I was done, I looked up, and for a moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Heard, not by someone else, but by the part of myself that had finally stopped pretending not to care. I don't know what you believe about the sky, whether you see it as heaven or mystery or just air and stars. But what I do know is this: there's something sacred about being seen, even if only by the vastness above. Because when the world feels too tight, too loud, too distracted, the sky reminds you that you are still small, but never insignificant. Now I make time for these conversations, not every night, not out of obligation, but when the weight returns, as it always does, I step outside. I look up and I speak, not to be understood, but to remember that I still have a voice, and that voice, even when shaky, still matters. So let me ask you something softly. If you could say anything to the sky tonight, anything at all, what would it be? Who would you speak to? What would you finally let go of? What part of your heart is still waiting to be heard? You don't need to have the words right now, just the willingness. The sky will wait, it always has. I used to wonder why I remembered the painful things more clearly than the beautiful ones. Why? Out of all the years I've lived, my mind would return again and again to the words that cut, the faces that left, the moments when I failed. Why not the laughter? Why not the summer breeze through the open window? Why not the kindness in a stranger's eyes? Why, when I lay in bed at night, did my mind seem to have a spotlight pointed only at the cracks? It's a cruel trick, isn't it? To have lived decades of life, full of smiles and victories and quiet grace, only to have your memory insist on looping the scenes that ache. I thought it was a flaw, a personal weakness, some internal failure of mine. But then I learned it's biology, and for the first time, I began to forgive myself. You see, the human brain was designed for survival, not for happiness, not for peace, not even for clarity, but for protection. And protection, in the evolutionary sense, means one thing above all. Remember what hurt you. There's a part of the brain called the amygdala, two little almond-shaped clusters that act like emotional alarm bells. When something painful happens, especially something tied to fear, loss, or shame, the amygdala lights up. It marks that moment as dangerous, as important, as something we must never forget. Why? Because forgetting a threat could mean facing it again. And long ago, when we lived closer to wild animals and hunger and war, that kind of forgetting could cost us our lives. Even now, thousands of years later, your brain still reacts the same way. It says, that thing you regret, that moment you failed, that time you were humiliated, never forget it, because remembering might keep you safe. But the brain doesn't always know the difference between a lion in the bushes and a voice that embarrassed you in a meeting 20 years ago. It just remembers what hurt, and it replays it, not to torture you, but to protect you. When I learned that, something in me softened, because I realized I wasn't broken. I was built to survive. Even my overthinking, the endless rehearsals, the mental time travel, the worry loops, they were all just my brain's way of saying, I don't want you to get hurt again. Can you feel that? Can you hear the kindness buried inside the noise? It took me years to see it, but once I did, everything began to change. Of course, understanding the science didn't erase the pain. Knowing that the amygdala and cortisol were involved didn't make the memories disappear, but it did give me a new lens. I stopped treating myself like a failure for having a noisy mind. I started treating myself like someone who had lived through things, someone whose brain was doing its best, someone who didn't need to fight the thoughts, but instead needed to reassure them. Now, when an old shame rises to the surface, I don't push it away. I sit with it. I say, you again. And then, gently, thank you for trying to protect me, but I'm safe now. Those 6 words have carried me through more dark nights than I can count. I'm safe now. Say it with me if you'd like. Say it slowly. Say it as many times as you need. Say it until your nervous system begins to believe you. Because the truth is, the brain can change. Even after 55, even after 75, even after a lifetime of fear. Neuroplasticity, they call it. But I call it mercy. So let me ask you something gently. What memory visits you the most? Is it a conversation, a silence, a door that closed too early, a word you never got to say? Whatever it is, know this. You're not remembering it because you're weak. You're remembering it because you're wired to care, because you are someone who has loved, someone who has lost, someone who still longs to understand. And that longing, it's not a flaw. It's your humanity. So when the pain rises, as it will, when the thought returns, as it does, don't ask, why can't I let this go? Instead, ask, what part of me still believes I need this pain to stay safe? And when the answer comes, if it comes, wrap it in patience, wrap it in kindness, and whisper again, I'm safe now. You don't have to protect me anymore. I'll take it from here. I didn't go out looking for wisdom. I was just looking for a place to sit. It was early spring, the kind where the air still bites in the shade, but the sun begins to make quiet promises. I'd been walking without a purpose again, not because I needed exercise, but because I needed distance. From screens, from thoughts, from myself. There was a park a few blocks from my house. Old, simple, nothing manicured or fancy, but it had one thing I loved: trees, dozens of them, tall, weathered, silent. I don't know their names. I never studied botany, but I've come to think of them as old neighbors, ones who've seen everything and have the good sense to say nothing. That day, I sat beneath the oldest tree I could find. Wide trunk, roots like veins, bark peeling gently at the edges like time taken off its coat. And I stayed. That was it. No music, no book, no task, just stillness. At first, my mind protested, as it always does. You should be doing something. You're wasting time. You're just sitting here like an old stump. But I didn't move, and neither did the tree. It simply stood and breathed in its own way and waited. There's something that happens when you sit long enough in the presence of something that doesn't need anything from you. You start to remember what being feels like. Not performing, not fixing, not striving, just being. That tree didn't care what I'd accomplished that week. It didn't care whether I had regrets or bad habits or unreturned phone calls. It didn't rush me. It didn't judge me. It didn't ask for small talk. It just kept being a tree. And in doing so, it gave me permission to just be. Have you ever tried that? Sitting with something that doesn't need you to be better? Something that just invites your presence, not your progress? If you haven't, find a tree. Any tree, big or small. One that leans, one that stands straight, one that's lost half its leaves. And sit with it. Not to learn anything, but to remember something you already know. Over the weeks that followed, I made a habit of it. Whenever the thoughts got too loud or the house too tight, I'd go and find a tree. Sometimes I'd speak aloud. Sometimes I'd cry. Sometimes I'd do nothing but breathe and listen to the wind move through the branches. And you know what I learned? Trees don't resist the wind. They don't curse it. They don't panic when it blows harder than they expect. They don't try to control it or argue with it. They bend, they sway, they let it pass. And when the wind is gone, they're still standing. Maybe a little shaken, maybe a few leaves lighter, but still rooted, still whole. That's what I want to be like. Not unmoved, but unbroken. Not rigid, but rooted. Not untouched by storms, because storms are part of life. But unwilling to believe that storms get the final say. And somehow the trees taught me that, without a word. Sometimes healing doesn't come from people, or books, or advice. Sometimes it comes from something that's been growing quietly beside you your whole life, waiting for you to slow down long enough to notice it. Something that doesn't promise to fix you, just to keep you company. And in that quiet companionship, something begins to shift. You begin to feel not less fragile, but less alone in your fragility. Because you're reminded, even the strongest things bend. Even the quietest things endure. Even the simplest things can teach you how to stay. So let me ask you, softly, where do you go when you need to feel still again? Is there a bench, a tree, A path you once walked but haven't returned to? Go there, not to change anything, just to listen. Because sometimes the oldest voices in the world don't speak English or any language at all. They speak in wind, in shade, in roots, in breath, and they are waiting for you still. For most of my life, I was kind to everyone but me. I didn't mean to be harsh, I wasn't cruel. But when it came to myself, the rules were different, stricter. I had standards, expectations, and an inner voice that rarely let me rest. Do more. Be better. Don't mess this up. And my favorite, you should have known better. That voice sounded like discipline, like responsibility, like being a grown-up. But it wasn't. It was shame wearing a suit. I used to think kindness was something you gave to others after you'd handled your own mess. After you'd earned rest. After you'd been productive, generous, composed. But what I've learned, slowly, tenderly, is that the moment you need kindness the most is the moment you believe you deserve it the least. And that was hard for me to accept. I remember one afternoon when it all caught up to me. I had dropped a cup, something simple, and it shattered in the kitchen. But what shattered more was me. I collapsed into a chair and started crying. Not because of the cup, but because I realized I had spent the whole day, maybe the whole year, speaking to myself in a tone I wouldn't dare use with a stranger. I had become the kind of voice I would have defended others against. And I whispered through tears, I'm so tired of being hard on myself. And in the quiet that followed, a new voice came, one I barely recognized as my own. It said, then stop. That moment didn't solve everything, but it became a beginning, the beginning of a new question. What if I treated myself like someone I loved? I started small, letting myself sit down before finishing the dishes, making a cup of tea before fixing the mail pile, taking a nap without earning it, looking in the mirror and offering a soft smile instead of critique. And when I made mistakes, which I still did often, I practiced saying, that was human, and you are allowed to be human. At first it felt fake, like I was playing pretend. But kindness, like anything else, is a muscle, and mine had atrophied from years of disuse. So I kept practicing. I wrote little notes to myself. I started using a gentler tone inside my head. I paused when I caught myself spiraling and asked, would I say this to someone I love? If the answer was no, I let it go, or at least I tried. Kindness doesn't mean avoiding accountability. It doesn't mean ignoring your faults or pretending everything is fine. It means holding the truth with compassion. It means saying, yes, you fell short, but you are still worthy of care. Yes, you're tired, rest anyway. Yes, you forgot, forgive yourself anyway. And over time, something shifted. My home felt softer, not because I redecorated, but because the energy inside it changed. My mornings became slower, my evenings more sacred, my sleep a little deeper. And when the overthinking returned, which it still does, I no longer tried to defeat it. I comforted it. I said, I see you. You're trying to protect me again, but I've got this now. Let me ask you gently, when was the last time you were truly kind to yourself? Not indulgent, not distracted, but kind. The kind of kindness that doesn't need to be earned, that doesn't wait for improvement, that simply says, you are already enough. You are already forgiven. You are already home. If you've been hard on yourself for aging, for forgetting, for not being who you once were, I invite you to begin again. Not by changing everything, but by changing how you speak to yourself. Try whispering instead of scolding. Try mercy instead of judgment. Try asking what you need, not what you owe. Because at this stage of life, we no longer have time to waste on self-cruelty. But we do have time, precious time, to become our own friend. And I promise you, it's never too late. If there's one phrase that haunted most of my quiet moments, it was this: what if? What if I had chosen a different path? What if I had spoken up? What if I had stayed? What if I had left sooner? What if I hadn't said that thing? What if I had? It's such a small phrase, just 2 words, but it has the weight of 1,000 regrets. I used to think I was just being thoughtful, reflective, careful with the past, but the truth was, I was holding on to a life I never lived, to versions of myself that no longer existed, to conversations that were long over, but still played on repeat in my mind like an old film reel I couldn't seem to turn off. And the more I clung to those what-ifs, the heavier I became, like dragging invisible luggage through every room of my life. I didn't know it then, but what I was carrying wasn't memory. It was resistance. Resistance to what had already happened. Resistance to what I could no longer change. Resistance to the imperfection of being human. And resistance is exhausting. One night I was reading Marcus Aurelius again, that small book that had become a kind of companion to me. The page said, "Don't waste time wondering what a good person should be. Be one." And in the margin, I wrote a simple variation. Don't waste your life wondering what could have been. Live what is. It hit me like cool water, because I realized that I was spending more energy on imagined pasts than on the life I actually had. The dinner in front of me, the person who called that afternoon, the breath in my chest, the quiet that was already offering healing. If only I would let it. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been so caught up in what didn't happen that you forgot to live what is happening? It's so easy to do, especially as we age, especially as the chapters behind us begin to outnumber the pages ahead. We start reviewing the story, editing it, second-guessing the plot, wishing for a red pen and a second draft. But here's what I've learned, slowly and painfully. We only ever get one draft, and our power lies not in rewriting the beginning, but in how we choose to live the rest. So I began to practice something new. I started noticing each time a what if arrived, and instead of following it down the rabbit hole, I whispered, maybe, but here I am. That became my mantra. Maybe, but here I am. Maybe I should have called, but here I am, alive to call someone today. Maybe I shouldn't have left, but here I am with what I've learned. Maybe it was a mistake, but here I am, still capable of love. The past didn't change, but my grip on it did. And with every loosening, I gained back a little more of myself. There's a practice in Stoicism called amor fati, love of fate. It means choosing to love your life, not in spite of the hard parts, but because of them. It means saying, this is mine, all of it. The joy, the sorrow, the missteps, the detours, and I will not curse the road that brought me home. It doesn't mean you stop feeling pain. It doesn't mean you deny loss. It just means you stop arguing with reality. You meet it instead, with open hands, with a soft heart, with the courage to say, this is enough. Now when I feel the old questions rise, when my mind reaches for the phantom paths I never walked, I don't push them away. I nod. I say, I see you. And then quietly, but I choose now. Because the truth is, what if doesn't feed us, but acceptance does, presence does, love does. So if your heart is full of what ifs right now, if you lie awake wondering about the roads you didn't take, the words you didn't say, the endings you didn't write, I invite you to pause. Not to erase those thoughts, but to soften your grip and to ask yourself, what beauty might still be possible if I stopped waiting for a different past? You don't need to have an answer. Just let the question breathe inside you. And maybe in that space, you'll find the peace that comes not from changing the story, but from finally making peace with being the one who lived it. For most of my life, I thought sleep was a transaction. You work hard, you lie down, you close your eyes, you drift off. That's how it was supposed to go. And for many years it did. I slept like a stone in my younger days. I could fall asleep on the couch, in the car, even at a kitchen table with the radio humming in the background. Sleep was easy, effortless, a friend I didn't have to think about. But then slowly, and then suddenly, it wasn't. If you followed me this far, you already know the middle chapters of that story. The racing thoughts, the long nights, the looped memories, the ache of a mind that wouldn't settle, no matter how tired the body was. For a while, I thought it was just age. Then I blamed stress, then regret, then caffeine, then the mattress, then myself. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't just having trouble sleeping. I was unlearning how to rest, and relearning it took time. Today, sleep and I have a different kind of relationship. We're not in a hurry. We don't expect perfection from each other. We meet each night, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as cautious companions. There are still nights when I lie awake longer than I'd like, but I no longer panic. I no longer reach for my phone. I no longer tell myself, you're broken. Instead, I return to my rituals. My evening walk, if the weather allows, a warm cup of tea, soft lighting in the room, and that small act that signals to my mind, we're safe now. It's okay to rest. I turn on my reading lamp, the one I've mentioned before, and pull out a book. Usually something quiet, philosophy, poetry, a story told gently, and I let the page meet me where I am. The lamp casts a soft golden glow, not too bright, not too dim, and the world begins to blur at the edges. That little light has become more than a tool. It's become a kind of signal, a lighthouse for the restless ship of my mind. And yes, I found it online, just a simple Amazon purchase, but it's stayed with me longer than most things I've bought in recent years. If you're curious, I've linked it in the description again. Not because it's magic, but because it's been part of the magic, the quiet, repeatable kind. What's changed is not just the way I fall asleep, it's the way I approach sleep. I no longer treat it as a task. I treat it as a return, a coming home, not just to bed, but to self. If I had to put it into words, I'd say this. Sleep now feels like trust. Trust in my body, trust in the present moment, trust that nothing needs to be solved right now. Because rest isn't something you take, it's something you receive. When you finally stop trying to prove you deserve it. There was a night not long ago when I woke up around 3 a.m., not startled, not anxious, just awake. The old version of me would have tensed up immediately, started scanning thoughts, reached for explanations, fallen into frustration. But this time I just lay there, breathing, listening, letting the dark be dark. And I whispered to myself, "You're okay. There's nothing to fix. Just rest anyway." Not sleep, just rest. And eventually, without force, without fear, sleep came again. Not because I chased it, but because I finally stopped running from myself. So if you're struggling with sleep right now, if your nights feel long and your mind feels loud, let me offer this. You don't need to conquer the night. You just need to befriend it. Create a ritual. Make space for slowness. Give your body signals of safety. Turn off the harsh lights. Read something quiet. Speak to yourself the way you'd speak to a child who's afraid of the dark. Because that's what most of us are. Deep down, children still learning that we are allowed to rest. And if all else fails, just whisper this before bed. I've done enough for today. I've thought enough for today. I am enough, even in this silence. And it's okay to let go. Then turn down the lights, pull the blanket close, and let the night hold you. Not because you've earned it, but because you're here. And that is enough. For most of my life, I believed every thought I had, not because they were always wise, they weren't. Not because they made me feel good, often they didn't, but because they felt true. And truth, I thought, was sacred, non-negotiable. If I thought I had failed, then I must have failed. If I thought someone didn't like me, then it must be true. If I thought I was too late to change, then that must be the end of the story. But slowly, and I mean slowly, I began to notice something. My thoughts didn't always tell the truth. They told stories, some rooted in fear, some in shame, some in old scripts I didn't even remember writing. And once I saw that, something cracked open. It started with a question. If I can observe my thoughts, who is the one doing the observing? That question changed everything. Because if I could watch a thought come and go, then maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the thought. Maybe I was something beneath it, before it, beyond it. Have you ever noticed that? That quiet space between thoughts? It doesn't last long, just a breath, a flicker, before the next idea rushes in. But if you listen closely, it's there. That space, that's you. Not the story, not the spiral, not the doubt. You. I remember one morning when this truth landed fully in my body. I was sitting in my usual chair, warm tea in hand, the light barely filtering through the curtains. My thoughts were buzzing, old worries, strange dreams, future fears. But instead of chasing them, I paused. And I said out loud, that's just a thought. Not a prophecy, not a command, just a thought. It felt strange at first, like I was talking to a stranger in my own head. But then I said it again, and again. Each time a worry appeared, I answered gently, that's just a thought. And slowly the buzzing quieted. Not because the thoughts were gone, but because I had stopped believing they were me. Imagine this with me. Your thoughts are like clouds in the sky. Some are dark, some light, some pass quickly, some linger. But the sky itself, the vast blue canvas, that's you. The sky doesn't fight the clouds. It doesn't chase them. It doesn't hold on when they're gone. It simply is. And so are you. This realization didn't make me immune to overthinking, but it gave me distance, space, freedom. I could now say, I'm having the thought that I'm failing, instead of, I'm a failure. That small shift, just a few words, changed everything. Because suddenly I wasn't in the storm. I was watching it. From shelter, from stillness, from self. Sometimes I still forget. I still get caught. Still believe the stories. Still spiral. But now I catch it sooner. Now I know how to come back. I breathe, I pause, I name it. A thought. And I return to the space between. So let me ask you, what's a thought you've believed for too long? That you're too old to change? That you're too broken to be loved? That your best years are behind you? What if those aren't truths, but just thoughts? What if you could let them pass? What if you didn't have to argue with them, but you also didn't have to obey? What if you could just say, I see you, and I choose not to follow? You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness beneath them, the witness, the gentle presence that stays, even when the stories don't. And in that awareness, there is peace, not because the mind goes silent forever, but because you finally remembered who's in the room. There's a kind of knot that forms in the mind when too many thoughts go unspoken. It's not always dramatic, just tight. You carry it quietly from room to room. It pulls in your chest. It buzzes behind your eyes. And you know something is off, but you can't quite say what it is. That was me, most evenings. Even after I'd slowed my pace, dimmed the lights, brewed the tea, read a page or two, the knot remained. Until one night I picked up a pen, not to journal, not to make a list, not to be productive, just to release. I opened an old notebook, the kind I used to keep receipts in, and I wrote a sentence that surprised me. I don't know what I feel right now, but I want to find out. And then I kept writing. Messy, wandering, unstructured, no punctuation, no spelling checks, no editing, just thought after thought, spilling onto the page like water finding its own way down the hill. And when I stopped, maybe 10 minutes later, I felt something I hadn't felt all day. Relief. I didn't solve anything that night. I didn't arrive at some profound insight. But I had taken the tangle in my mind and laid it out, line by line, where I could see it. And there's something powerful about seeing your thoughts on paper. They become less mythic, less monstrous. You realize that's what I was afraid of. That's what I was carrying. That's all it was. Since then, I've kept writing, not every day, not as a rule, but often. At night, when the thoughts are circling. In the morning, when dreams still linger. In moments of joy, too, not just sorrow. And I never write for anyone else. Not for legacy, not for memory, not for clarity, just for kindness. Kindness to the self who needs space, to the thoughts that need a landing pad, to the heart that's trying to speak through all the noise. Sometimes I write only one sentence. Sometimes 3 pages. Sometimes I don't write words at all, just shapes or lists of color names or lines that begin with, I miss. There are no rules in this practice, only presence, only breath, ink, honesty. You don't need to be a writer to do this. You don't need the right notebook or the perfect pen or a desk with a view. All you need is a willingness to stop carrying everything in your head, because the mind was not built to store emotions. It was built to feel them, to move them, and then, when it's safe, to let them go. And for me, writing is how I let go. Have you ever tried it? Not structured journaling, not Dear Diary, just the kind of writing that feels like exhaling? If not, I invite you to try tonight. Open a page. Write the first thought that appears, then another, and another. Even if it's nonsense, even if it's just, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired. Sometimes the repetition is the release. Sometimes naming the heaviness is all the light you need. I've found notes from myself that make me laugh, others that still sting. Some that say nothing but a date in a single word. Okay, they're not masterpieces, but they're evidence. Evidence that I stayed with myself, that I didn't turn away, that I made a small space each day, just to be real. And that space, humble as it is, has become one of the most sacred places I know. So if your mind feels tangled tonight, if your thoughts feel too loud, too layered, too much. Try writing, not to explain, not to impress, not to solve, just to let what's inside out. Because some burdens don't need answers. They just need a page. There was a morning, clear, blue, unremarkable, when I finally said it aloud. I'm tired of fighting things I cannot change. I didn't say it in anger. I didn't shout it to the sky. I just whispered it into the stillness of my own kitchen, like a man admitting something to a friend he's known for years, but never really listened to. And just like that, something loosened. You see, I had spent most of my life arguing with reality. I don't mean dramatic arguments. I mean the quiet ones, the ones that live inside your breath. This shouldn't have happened. They should have treated me differently. I should have known better. This pain should be gone by now. Life shouldn't be this way. These thoughts sound logical, even noble. They dress themselves up in justice and principle. But underneath, they're resistance. And resistance is heavy. It's not that those thoughts are wrong. Sometimes people do treat us unfairly. Sometimes life is cruel. Sometimes things should have gone differently. But no matter how true that might be, reality doesn't negotiate. It doesn't bargain. It doesn't care how hard you tried. It simply is. And when you argue with what is, you always lose. Not because you're weak, but because you're fighting something that isn't listening. It took me years to realize that acceptance is not surrender. I used to think it meant giving up, letting people walk all over you, lowering your standards, pretending things were okay when they weren't. But that's not what true acceptance is. True acceptance is presence. It's standing barefoot in the middle of the storm and saying, "This is what's happening. I may not like it. I may wish it were different, but I'm not going to waste my soul pretending it isn't real." There was a situation in my life, I won't go into detail, but it haunted me for years. It was unfair, it was painful, and it wasn't my fault. But I kept returning to it, like a wounded animal licking the same place again and again, not letting it heal. I wanted justice, closure, a different ending. What I got was silence. And in that silence, I finally heard something else, a whisper I had ignored for too long. You don't need it to be fair, to be free. That was the beginning of peace. Now when something happens, a disappointment, a delay, a loss, I still feel it. I still grieve, but I no longer fight with it. I acknowledge it. I ask, can I control this? If the answer is yes, I take action. If the answer is no, I take a breath. And that breath, that's the hinge between suffering and surrender. It's the space where I choose not to collapse, not to rage, but to remain. Have you ever argued with something that cannot be changed? A past that refuses to rewrite itself? A person who won't apologize? A body that no longer behaves the way it used to? What if, just for a moment, you stop trying to make it different? Not because you've given up, but because you've chosen to come home. To this moment, to this breath, to this life. Unfinished, imperfect, real. There's a line from Byron Katie that I once read, and it never left me. She wrote, "When I argue with reality, I lose, but only 100% of the time. I've lost enough fights with reality to know she's right. So these days I try something else. I listen, I feel, I move with the current instead of against it. And in doing so, I've discovered something surprising. Reality is not the enemy. My resistance was. And when the resistance fades, what's left isn't weakness, it's peace. So if you're tired, not just physically, but soul tired, ask yourself, what am I still arguing with? And then gently, is it time to lay that burden down? You don't have to force an answer. Just sit beside the question. Let it breathe. Let it live with you a while. Because sometimes, the deepest kind of freedom begins not with a solution, but with a soft, brave whisper. This is how it is, and I can live with it. I didn't come to Stoicism through bookshelves or classrooms. I came to it through restlessness, through long, quiet evenings when my thoughts refused to settle, through the ache of overanalyzing conversations from decades ago, through the guilt of not being the man I thought I should have been. And in those hours, when nothing else worked, Stoicism found me, not like a doctrine, not like a set of rules, but like a friend sitting across from me in the dark saying, "You are only responsible for what's in your control." It sounds simple, doesn't it? Too simple, maybe. But I can tell you, this one sentence has saved me more times than I can count. Because most of what tormented me was never mine to carry in the first place. The past, other people's opinions, the outcome of things already done, the future with all its imagined failures. I held it all. I tried to fix it all. I lost sleep over it all. Until one night, I heard the whisper again, "Not in your control. Let it go." That was the heart of it. Not coldness, not detachment, but discernment. The quiet strength to ask, "Is this mine?" And if the answer was no, I learned to lay it down. Not always easily, not always without pain, but with growing trust that I didn't have to be the caretaker of everything. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, they all said it in their own way. And somehow those old Roman voices began to shape my modern evenings. They didn't teach me how to win. They taught me how to lose with grace, how to endure with dignity, how to stay calm when the mind wanted to panic, and most importantly, how to rest, truly rest, by releasing what wasn't mine. These days I still have thoughts, still have worries, still have regrets that knock on the door from time to time. But I answer differently now. I say, if I can act, I will. If I can't, I'll let it pass. That's it. No drama, no spiral, just peace in knowing the difference. Have you ever spent hours, even days, trying to fix something you have no power over? A grown child's decision, a stranger's judgment, an illness that came without asking. What if you asked yourself right now, what is within my control? Just that, nothing more. You may be surprised at how small that list is, but also how powerful, because in that small circle, your thoughts, your choices, your attitude, your words, lives all your freedom. For me, Stoicism didn't make me emotionless. It made me honest. It helped me stop pretending I could fix everything. It gave me the permission I never knew I needed. You don't have to carry the whole world, just your corner of it, and even that, with care, not control. That idea that I could live fully, love deeply, and still let go changed everything, especially at night, because that's when the noise used to return. But now I meet it with stillness, with a candle, a soft lamp, a sentence from an old book, and a heart that knows the difference between what is mine and what I can finally let go of. So if your evenings are still noisy, if the day doesn't end when the sun goes down, I offer you this. Let Stoicism be your companion, not as a set of rigid rules, but as a gentle guide that asks, every time the worry comes, is this yours? And if the answer is no, let it go. Turn off the light and rest, not because everything is solved, but because you finally remembered you don't need to believe every thought you have. You only need to choose which ones are worth keeping. The rest, can pass like clouds in a quiet sky. I didn't notice it at first. It happened so gradually, so gently, that it slipped into my life like morning light through a half-closed curtain. Soft, unnoticed, but real. I woke up one day, and I didn't feel heavy. I didn't reach for my thoughts like a reflex. I didn't brace for anxiety before my feet hit the floor. I didn't scan my memory for what I forgot to do the day before. I just woke up. And there was quiet, not silence. The world was still there. The birds, the creaking house, the kettle humming on the stove. But the quiet was inside me, and that I had almost forgotten how to feel. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no final breakthrough, just a morning like any other. Except I didn't carry the night into it. I got up, stretched, opened the window, took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, the air felt light. Healing didn't arrive like a rescue. It came like a rhythm. Through the tea, the reading light, the pages filled with ink and truth. Through the trees and the conversations, I whispered to the sky. Through the nights, I forgave myself, not all at once, but one regret at a time. It came through stillness, through sitting with what I couldn't fix, through asking, "Is this mine?" and answering, "No, not anymore." And then one quiet morning, without trying, I realized I didn't feel at war with myself, and that felt like peace. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't need to fix your whole life to feel better. You don't need to solve every thought. You don't need to silence the noise forever. You don't need to become a new person. You just need to remember that every thought is temporary, and that you, the one underneath the thought, are steady. You are here, and that is enough. Some mornings I still wake up with worry beside me, but now I greet it like an old acquaintance, one I no longer fear. I say, there you are. You can come with me if you'd like, but I won't follow you today. Then I go make the tea, open the blinds, and begin again. Not perfectly, but peacefully. So if you're still waiting for that moment, the one where it all gets quiet, let me say this: it's coming. Maybe not as a grand transformation, but as a gentle shift, a moment when you open your eyes and the sky doesn't feel so heavy. When your thoughts arrive, but they don't stay long. When you look in the mirror and see someone worth being kind to, someone who made it here, someone who's still here, someone who's finally learned to let go of what was never theirs to hold. And if you're not there yet, that's okay. Because just by listening to this, you've already begun. You've already opened a door inside yourself. And what's on the other side isn't silence. It's peace with the sound. So tomorrow when you wake up, before you reach for your phone or your thoughts or the memory of something unfinished, try this. Place your hand on your heart and whisper, "I'm here. I'm still here." And maybe that's enough for today, because it is. It truly is. If you've stayed with me until now, thank you. I mean it. Thank you. I hope that in my story you found glimpses of your own journey too. Overthinking is not a sign of weakness, my friend. It's often the mark of someone who has loved deeply, cared too much, and tried too hard for too long. But peace is possible. Stillness is within reach, and every quiet night is a chance to begin again. If any part of what I shared touched you, feel free to let me know in the comments. Tell me your story or just say hi. I read every word. And if you found this video helpful, I would deeply appreciate if you could like and subscribe. It helps me continue making content for those of us who just need a soft place to rest our thoughts.